Welcome to another edition of Persons of Interest. My name is Derek Dockett. I won't spend a lot of time introducing my guest in this episode, Mr. Luke Martin, because at the start, Luke and I spent some time discussing how we first met and the progression of how he landed as a full-time employee at Indiana State University, currently serving as the digital media coordinator for the Sycamores and also handling play-by-play for football. Luke had a number of other stops. We talked about his background, how he took interest in play-by-play and sports media, and a number of other things as well. So here's Luke Martin on Persons of Interest. The first time I interacted and met him was in 2016. The Missouri Valley Conference baseball tournament was in Terre Haute, Indiana. And at the time, he was not working for Indiana State University. He was actually, I believe you were new to Terre Haute. You were there to work, correct me if I'm wrong, is it 1130 The Fan?
Yes, FM 99.5, 1130 The Fan.
Okay, so he was there to do sports radio in Terre Haute, Indiana, and he jumps in, and that might have been, I don't know if that was your first week on the job. I don't know what that was, but you jumped in, and here's what happens. And I'm going the longest introduction possible, but this guy, I love him so much. We go to our baseball coaches meeting before the tournament, and, you know, we go through the tournament procedures and everything, and I'm talking to some of the coaches. They say, yeah, there's a guy that's been wanting to do interviews. You know anything about this? I'm like, I have no idea. Like, this is new. This never happens at the baseball tournament. Like, we don't do a pre-tournament media call or press conference or anything. He goes, well, I'm happy to do it, but this is weird that this guy has hit up all our SIDs or he's contacted and wanted to do these interviews. So, all right, I had no clue what was going on. I get back and I talk to Ace, the world famous Ace Hunt. Tells me, yep, we got a guy here, and they're covering the tournament, and they're going to be here all week and doing all this stuff. It's like, all right. Well, the first game ends that morning. We had 4 games in a day at the baseball tournament. This guy's interviewing the coach at the post game, and I see who this is, and I'm like, are you going to ask him if you're going to do this for everyone? He goes, I plan on it, or at least we're going to get some stuff recorded that we can run later. It's like, all right. And I thought it was the weirdest thing ever, but lo and behold, that's how I met Luke Martin, who was doing radio in Terre Haute, Indiana, and now he's even progressed even further. He's to me probably now Mr. Indiana State. And he's just taking that on, and well deserved, even coming from a Ball State guy. But Luke Martin, thanks so much for hopping on the podcast. Thanks again. How you doing, sir?
Oh, Derek, I'm doing great, man. You're bringing back some great memories. That was the very first week that I started in Terre Haute, the Missouri Valley Conference Baseball Tournament Championship. And, that's kind of, at least for me, what was the introduction to the Valley. I've been around the Valley a little bit. As you mentioned, I am a Ball State guy. So from the MAC, we played Ball State. We played Indiana State and some other schools within the Valley. But that was my first introduction to get to know the coaches and how classy each of the coaches were on a baseball side, which actually I think everybody besides Wichita, who's now left, which was Coach Butler, is still here, still there. And how classy those coaches are kind of led me to get to know you and the Valley staff and how much I really enjoy and love being around the Valley staff. So it seems like yesterday, but it hasn't been yesterday. It's been a few years, which is hard to believe.
I had to look it up to make sure I had the years correct because to me, and now that I don't work in the Valley anymore, the years are sort of all blended together. And I know Indiana State had hosted two times in like a 3 or 4 year span there. But I remember that tournament for a couple of different reasons. Because it was long nights for a couple of times. But of course, the baseball tournaments are always long because you play 4 games in a day and all that jazz. But we had never had that happen where we had someone wanted to interview all the coaches, and you were there for every post game wanting to talk to all the coaches. I was like, what is this guy doing? Like, it's simply just me interviewing for social media and doing highlight and game recap interviews. But you were there, and I was like, what's going on? And I would hop online. I see the tweets from 1130 The Fan, and they were putting them on SoundCloud. I'm like, what's going on? So that was the start of a beautiful relationship, I guess I can put it, because lo and behold, you became, you just brought a whole different level of high high school coverage, Indiana State coverage, just general sports coverage through the Wabash Valley there, with what you were doing when you first arrived on the scene there. And it even became where you had a segment in the Haute there, doing the show that was covering all things happening in Terre Haute, and with the heavy emphasis on Indiana State. And even for some reason had me on once a week. I still can't figure out why you were doing that, but I think people appreciate it because you were doing something that was not done in Terre Haute at the time.
Yeah, it hadn't been done in a while. You know, there were shows in Terre Haute, but a lot of them in the past would have a national spin. And kind of what I wanted to do was, like you said, make it a local spin, whether it's the local high schools, the local Indiana State College affiliate, Rose Holman, who's a Division III. We did a lot of Rose Holman stuff with Kevin Lanke and that group, who do an outstanding job and still have really good relationships with. But whenever I wanted to do something national, I wanted to make sure it wasn't just me going on a 5-10 minute spiel about LeBron James, you know, or about whatever the biggest talking point was in that time. Whenever we were going to talk Indianapolis Colts football, we had somebody like Joe Stasiak, who was a former Colts player and on their network. I actually had Reggie Wayne call into the show one time, which was probably one of my all-time favorite interviews that I did. You know, I think I'm a wrestling fan, a WWE fan. I had Eric Bischoff call into the show at one point in time, which was a really kind of fan geek moment for me in terms of an interview process. But I wanted to make sure whatever we had on the show was an interview-based show. I was not very huge and still not on just touting my opinion and just making it a rambling of just me for an hour. You know, I want it to be with somebody else, especially when it's kind of a solo type show. So when we talked about the Valley and what's going on in the Valley, that's why I had you. That's why I'd look elsewhere to have other personalities come and be a part of the show, because I just thought that helped. And that's what was lacking. And I think Terre Haute had sports shows in the past. Unfortunately, that station is now a classic rock station. There's no more sports radio locally in Terre Haute. But that was kind of the show that I think it really did. It kind of united everybody in this area, and whether you were in Terre Haute, Terre Haute South, West Vigo, Northview, we covered it all, tried to cover it all as much as we could. Indiana State, Rose Holman. It was a lot of fun. And as you know, Derek, in your role when you were at the Valley, not only did you work with one sport, you worked with all of them. And when you work with so many different outlets, when you work with so many different schools, what does that do? It opens the door to more relationships, and that's exactly why we're connected. That's exactly why we stay connected, and that's exactly why you work in the field we are in.
So before I jump forward to what you're doing now, I want to go back a little bit. We mentioned your background there with Ball State. I don't know if a lot of people know, a lot of people in the business know, in the sports and communications field, really great program there at Ball State. They've got a really great sports communication and do fantastic job at streaming and things like that. Ball State Sports Link and all those types of things there. Talk about what led you there and to become interested in this sports communication field, and just sort of how you took it and ran with it.
Well, I grew up in southern Indiana, Columbus, Indiana, went to Columbus East High School, and about middle school age is when I kind of got the itch of wanting to be a broadcaster of some sort. We were big Purdue fans growing up, so I was listening to a guy by the name of Larry Clisby, who's still the voice of the Boilermakers for basketball, listen to Joe McConnell, who was the voice of Purdue football at the time, and just listening to those two iconic voices in my eyes, in my ears, I guess I could probably say, was just the excitement level both of those two guys have for the sport that they had. It just had me really intrigued. So when I went to high school, Don Baker, my TV teacher in high school, kind of told him my interest. He really led me. He's an Indiana State grad, by the way, nice. Kind of ironic at the time. But he kind of led me down the interest and really allowed me to do what was called the Luke Martin Show, which was a 30-minute TV show locally in Columbus. It was just
what
on
year
a.
Is this?
This would have been May. This would have been 2009 to about 2011.
So you had the Luke Martin Show already.
It's if you YouTube it, I don't encourage you to, but if you YouTube it, you'll look it up. You'll see the clips. It's I can't go back and watch, but no, it was a lot of fun, and that really intrigued me to wanting to do that at college. So I looked at a lot of areas because we were big Purdue fans. I looked at Purdue first, and I went to Purdue, and to say the least, I was really blown away in the opposite direction of where you want to be blown away in about Purdue's facilities for it. And actually, on that trip I took, they looked at me and they said, "Do you really want to do this?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "You should look at Ball State." And I was like, okay. So I looked at Ball State. I found a guy by the name of Chris Taylor. And since then, CT and I have had a really good relationship. CT got me intrigued. He is still at Ball State. He has built Ball State Sports Link with the help of others, but really CT's the one that has bolstered it and taken it to the next level to what it is today. And CT just ramped it up when I got to Ball State and taught me so much of what I thought I already knew but didn't know. Whether it's how to tell a story, and not just tell a story, but the process of it, of building that relationship, and not just building a relationship to get a story, to have a genuine relationship with it. You know, don't look at a story of this has got to get an award. Just look at a story and go, this has just got to be a good story, and don't get in the way. And there's so much more we could dive into and what CT taught us, and what Alex Cartman, who's there, Brad Daly, who's there, who were both classmates of mine, now full-time employees there at Ball State and full-time professors in the Sports Link program. But really, that's kind of where it started. It was just an itch of listening to guys like Larry Clisby and Joe McConnell, getting to meet those guys, and ultimately getting into a high school that supported me. I mentioned Don Baker, Bob Gaddis, who's still the not the athletic director there, but still the football coach there. I mean, he let me into all the meetings. He let me into the locker room with a camera, behind-the-scenes access. And as you know what I do now, I thank Coach Gaddis because he really got me prepped for how to treat a Kurt Mallory like I do today, how to be around a player after a loss, after a win, after a disappointing practice. All those situations I got to deal with while I was in high school. And that's why it wasn't as big of an eye-opener when I got to college. And once I had that experience at Ball State, it was not an eye-opening experience when I got to UNCG in Greensboro, North Carolina for my first job. Because as you know, every coach, every school is different. You know, some coaches can be, let's just say, odd in how they structure things, and it's not always easy to figure that out. And I had practice about it, trying to figure it out, being able to adjust to different personalities way back all the way to high school.
So you knew going into you stuck with, you knew what you wanted to do. You were in it and went through it, battled through it, learned all you could. And I mean, sports communication, broadcasting has been your thing, seems like going all the way back that far.
Long time, you know, and I can't tell you how many times, and I think even my parents, I don't think they would really admit it, but I think deep down they were like, you sure you don't want to look at anything else? And a lot of it was because when I was starting to interview for jobs right out of school, you realize you don't make a lot of money.
Right.
And my parents are in a totally different field. And when I was telling them, hey, these are my job offers and this is how much money I'm going to take, they kind of looked at me and said, are you sure you really want to do this?
Because we don't want you living at home.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, we don't want you to live at home. 18 years is long enough, Luke. Get the heck out of the house. Luckily, I haven't been, I haven't lived at home since I've got my first job, so that's always a good thing. But in a way, you know, that's, you know, there's a lot of people that told me, hey, you sure you don't want to do anything else? And I just never had a backup plan. This has always been what I wanted to do. I don't want to do anything else. It's a big part of what I do still to this day, and hopefully will be for as long as I do. You know, I'm still single. I don't have a family, so I can spend all of my time doing this, what I want to do. So until that changes, you know, whatever happens will happen. But for right now, and for the way it has been, I've always had my mindset on it, and it's always what I wanted to do, and I'm not going to change it.
What's one of your biggest takeaways from your time at Ball State? I mean, I know now the way that program is. I've seen some of the stuff online, and there's been lots of different write-ups about them from the College Sports Video, and that's one of the sort of quote-unquote gold standard type programs that are doing it right. And when ESPN3 first came onto the scene, they were doing it right. You know, they're looked at as like, you know, one of the leaders of how to do communication and broadcasting and streaming and, interviews and all that stuff. It's not just journalism. It's specifically sports communication, what they're doing there. What's one of the things that you sort of still look back like, man, I'm still treating this like I were in college because that's the way I learned it and that's what stuck with me?
That's a great question. There's a lot of things. So I obviously pointed to CT. He's a big reason for it. But I think why Ball State is so successful is you even look at people like a Susie Smith, who is a journalism professor, yet she worked at CNN Sports. Tim Underhill, who is more of a journalism type photographer, but for freelance, Professor Underhill would shoot normally basket camera for Big Ten Network broadcasts. Rich Swingley, who's really an audio engineer, not necessarily for sports. Whenever ESPN Monday Night Football would come to town, he'd be Audio One for those broadcasts. So you had a lot of professors around you that maybe necessarily weren't sports specific, but they understood it. And if you were a sports guy, they wanted to help you go in that direction, but could also bring another perspective. We were, of course, in our digital sports program room, and we had our classes together where it would be digital sports production specific, but you'd also have to branch out and go to a journalism class, go across the street and go to a sports admin class. And why I think Ball State, why it's a gold standard program, is because you have cooperation through all branches, from the athletic department allowing you access to allow the students to be able to interact with the student athletes, to interact with the coaches, to other departments, which if you've been a part of a university at times, most of the time they don't always get along. Right. And for them to be able to work hand in hand, to be able to build a degree in that fashion, and also to have professors there who, quite frankly, aren't there to teach it because they can't do it. They can do it. Most of the time, they're still doing it and teaching it at the same time. And I think that's what was so great about Ball State is while I was talking to Tim Underhill, while I was talking to Susie Smith, while I was talking to Chris Taylor, Alex Cartman, Brad Daly, all those guys were doing that job at the same time, at some point in time, for a really good production company. John Cervisi would come over all the time with WebStream and snatch me, snatch somebody up, snatch someone else, another student up, because of the school we came from. I think that speaks volumes, is the cooperation. To say, one thing I may have learned, I guess, besides like the one thing that stood out about Ball State, I would just say the importance of relationships. And I think so many people want to overcomplicate it and think you need this great skill set and be so good with a camera and know how to edit. And you do need to know those things. But when it really comes down to it, the reason you're able to tell those stories well, or even have access to those stories, you got to build trust with an individual. I'll tell a quick story. Christian Covington, who was a running back for us here at Indiana State, tragically found out he had spinal stenosis after a hit against Missouri State this past year. It was a goal line stop. If he would have scored, we ultimately would have won the game against Missouri State late. He got stopped. He looked like he was paralyzed on the field. He ended up being helped off. He was able to walk off after a significant amount of time. He later found out the next day he had spinal stenosis. Football was over. Was not going to play. And he was a freshman running back, had a lot of time in front of him. And literally a week after, of course, there's a lot of people who want to talk to him and want to maybe tell his story. He trusts me to be able to tell it and to tell it the right way. And if you're not there every day and you don't build that relationship, and I didn't go up to him and go, hey, I want to tell your story. Hey, I want to tell your story. He said, hey, I trust you. And that's what it really all comes down to is, you got to have a skill set. You got to be able to know how to shoot a camera, be able to put a story together. You got to know those things. But you can know those things and not know how to work a relationship and never have any access to be able to tell those stories, or most importantly, to tell them the right way. And I think that's the biggest takeaway I got from SportsLink is it's not just telling a story, it's how you go through the process of telling a story, because you can have the great cameras, you can have all the great equipment which SportsLink now has, but there's also a huge X factor in that, and that's how you treat it, and that's how you go about it. And sometimes it may take you 2, 3, 4 months to be able to build that relationship to get it, or even longer. It may take years. But you got to understand that going into it, not push and be like, I need that Emmy Award tomorrow. That's not what it's about. It's about building those relationships, because those relationships last more than, quite honestly, that story will. So you graduate from Ball State. What do you do between Ball State and Terre Haute, 1130 The Fan? What's your career run there?
in that stretch of time?
Well, I first left Ball State would have been December 2014 is when I graduated. I graduated a semester early. I went and took an internship with MLB Productions, MLB Network in Secaucus, New Jersey. I was there from January to March, and I really enjoyed my time there. It was a great experience, but it wasn't exactly what I was probably hoping for. A lot of it was video logging. Intern type jobs. It's what you expect. It was actually a conversation that sparked it for me. They really liked me. I had a chance to move up and stay there in terms of continuing through their internship program, but also some of their production roles. I talked to Brian Kenny, who's the host of MLB Now and does a lot of other stuff with the MLB Network, and I told him my aspirations and said, I'd love to be a play-by-play guy. I'd love to be maybe an anchor at some point like you do. And he looked at me and he said, well, if you want to do it, you got to do it. You can be around here. You can learn from me. You can be in a producer type role, and you can take a lot from me, a Bob Costas or whomever that walks through these doors. But eventually, you got to do it.
Right.
And that really stuck with me. And so at the end of my internship, I decided to go back to Ball State. I was there for a couple months, did baseball radio, basically a baseball SID for a couple of months. And then I looked for a job. And I think I interviewed 13 different jobs in 12 different states.
Wow.
Got out of school, and ultimately I landed in North Carolina, Greensboro, North Carolina. Matt McAllister, who was my boss in Greensboro, was actually at Ball State when I was a freshman. He ultimately left, took the head job there at UNCG in their communications department. I was at UNCG for a calendar year from that August to the following May. Worked all the way through the softball championship and ultimately got to the Fan. And then I was at the Fan for about 9 months before jumping to Indiana State. And UNCG was great to me. I love living in Carolina, specifically when we get to the cold months of winter here. And I kind of miss Greensboro from time to time. But that was a great learning experience too. And being able to get to know those coaches. That was a basketball-centric school. Still is. They didn't have football. So it was nice to kind of now be Indiana State where basketball's still king. Don't get me wrong. We all really care what Coach Lance and them are doing right now. But what Coach Mallory's done is really rejuvenated this area and really gotten a lot of people excited about football, which is what I do, football play in the fall. So which is really my true passion and what I really love to do. So that's kind of my career path, where it's taken me. And luckily, this is the longest stance I've had in terms of where I've been in a job now in Terre Haute, where I've been in Terre Haute since, that 2016. So around there. So It's hard to believe it's been that long.
Yeah. So I never knew. So I knew your connection, or you had a connection with UNCG just because I'd see you tweet and, retweet some stuff and some shout outs to some baseball players, things like that. I never knew that that was your tie-in there. So that's interesting to me. That's uncovered territory that I never had a chance to ask you about. So now we fast forward. You're in Terre Haute. I meet you at the baseball tournament. For some reason, you got me on once a week. We're talking Valley, and we're having fun, which was great. Like, I literally, why am I doing, why does this guy want me to do this? But it was fun. Like, it wasn't, I didn't even realize it was on the radio until, I'd get Ace Hunt tweeting at me about something that we said, or I see that, so it's posted on SoundCloud. First time I ever had the chance to do that, so that was awesome. And then, as you mentioned, radio gig was no more, and you were very cryptic about, don't worry, there's still something going on. I think I might still be here, but I can't say anything yet, but I think it's going to happen. And it comes out that you're going to be working at Indiana State, and I'm just like, this is awesome. This dude has so much energy, and it's almost like a perfect fit. And I didn't really know what you'd be doing at Indiana State. I'm not sure if you knew at the time what you'd be doing once you got hired. Because I'm like, man, they could totally use a social media person. That's great. Because my role at the Valley was, I wasn't an SID. I was strictly the person that was there to be the advocate, to be the voice on social media and do video content. And, for me, I was doing the website and graphic design. There's always been this turn in college athletics to have those types of people that aren't the SID. They are strictly there to be the digital person. They're there to do the social media and the video content, and it's just growing in that direction now. A little bit slower at the non-BCS level or the FCS level, mind you, but it's getting there finally. So when I see the Indiana State has got a guy now, it's like, awesome. But now, fast forward, then you jump into becoming, as you mentioned, you get the opportunity to do football play-by-play, and you've literally just taken and run with it in terms of the video content online. Was that your initial goal going into it? Like, when you took that job and when you started, what did you think year one would even be?
Really, what I wanted to do is have a paycheck and have a job. So that was a big part of it. But in all honesty, when I took the job, I wasn't promised any of those things. I wasn't promised saying, hey, you're going to be football play-by-play, boys. You're going to do this. I was still doing women's basketball radio at the time.
Okay.
Technically, when I was with the Fan, they freelanced me to do that. So I just carried that over for the rest of that year. But I knew I had the job to do. And ultimately, because that's what was at UNCG. What led me to come back to Terre Haute was the play-by-play, was to do radio, was to do that job. That's what I really wanted to do. I didn't want to be a producer in a truck for E3. That wasn't my passion. That's not what I wanted to do. But I had the job to do. And that's why I had to do it at UNCG, and I did it. I hope Matt, would say that about me and say, hey, I know Luke didn't necessarily enjoy it, but when I asked him to do it, he did it. And same thing when I got to Indiana State. My first time there was just to blow the heck out of video because there was no video prior, very minimal video prior to when I got there on all sports, and even our major sports. It had some, but it was really our track and field, a very historic program that kind of has been overlooked and not a ton on, to baseball, to softball, to even football at the time under Coach Sanford. Didn't really have a ton of video content. So basically I was like, okay, I'm just going to try to come in, bombard, and try to do as much as I can. And I think it was just, as you know, Derek, it's all about timing. When I got hired, a guy by the name of Kurt Mallory got hired here in Terre Haute at the same time. There in January. My third week at Indiana State was when Coach Mallory first started. And I was able to work with him from the ground floor. He invited me to his office and said, what do you want to do? I said, okay, well, this is what I want to do. And come spring football, when everybody's seeing the coverage every day and seeing all the different stuff, all of our other sports were like, that's cool. Can we get that?
Right.
And then it just kind of grew. And then ultimately, once the summer, Sherrard, Ace, all of them said, hey, you've done a great job. What more can we do? And I said, well, I'd love to do play-by-play for some of our sports. Is there a way that we can make that happen? And a big piece of that was Brian Fritz to allow me to do football play-by-play. Fritzy, as we call him. Fritzy still does men's basketball. He's actually my color analyst for football games during the fall. And Fritzy, as you know, this is a field that this is a working field that can be filled with a lot of different personalities, and honestly, a lot of personalities that aren't very willing to let others have a chance. And Fritzy allowed me to. He said, Luke's worked so well with Coach Mallory from the video stuff, everything. He deserves it. And they gave me football play-by-play, and I've had that since. Coach Mallory's been here for now 2 years. So really, when I first started, I know it seems simple and it may not seem true to some on the outside, but I just said, just work. Just try to come up with as much as you can. Whether it's a track preview, a track recap, a basketball preview. To me, the stuff that's the biggest home run for what we do is the behind-the-scenes access. I think it's with anybody.
Yeah.
And that is not easy to get. We talked about trust and relationships earlier in this convo. That's exactly why Greg Lansing allows me in his locker room. That's exactly why Kurt Mallory, all of the coaches that we do. They don't have to do that.
Right.
They don't. That's not owed to me. I don't go to them, and if there's someone from another school feeling that their coach owes you that, they don't. That is their locker room. That's them when they're part of their team. Look, we work for the school. That's all fine and dandy. But if they want us out of there, they have every right to say, no, this is just for my coaches and our student athletes. That's it. And Coach Lansing has been tremendous. I mean, it doesn't matter if we're up 20 at halftime, down by 20. He'll let me in. It doesn't matter if we have a big, joyous win or a tough, difficult loss. I can go into the locker room, and he trusts me. And that has made a world of difference in everything we do, because everyone can see highlights. They can see game recaps. They can kind of get that and understand it. But they can't be in the locker room. They can't see those things. They don't know what Coach Lansing may be saying in a team huddle. Those are all things that he has been absolutely tremendous in. Coach Mallory too, and all of our coaches. Our major sports get a little bit more of the love just because of our smaller staff here year and try and disperse that out. But I mean, that's what makes it the world of difference is we started from basically nothing to be able to build it. Now there's a little bit more expectations with our sports.
You set the bar high.
But that is good. I'd much rather it be like I can't stand people. I say can't stand people. I just can't stand individuals who just stay with the flow. Who don't want to, well, I can't do too much because then that's just going to raise the expectations even more. Like what you said, you raise the bar. Well, you want that to be the issue. You always want to be
yourself.
Yeah, you owe it to yourself, number one, but you owe it to everybody else. And now it's great because I look around the valley where maybe about a year ago, we were kind of the only ones that were really producing something day to day. Now we see other schools starting to jump on board and starting to invest in it too. So, which is great because it's what this league needs. It's what each school needs because we have great stories at Indiana State, but I know there are great stories in Carbondale. There are phenomenal stories in Springfield, Missouri. There's great stories in Des Moines, Iowa. You can look all Normal, Illinois. You can go Peoria, everywhere throughout our league. You have terrific student athletes, terrific head coaches that have really good stories to tell. Luckily, I'm the one here in Terre Haute being able to tell our stories here, but it can easily be done all across our league. And it's really good to see some of my classmates who made hire. Tim Rushi's now at Bradley. There's a lot of others that are starting to sprinkle in. Connor Onions at Southern Illinois. So there are some sports league guys starting to filter throughout the valley. It's a great league, but yeah, to kind of go the long-winded and long tour answer to yourself, at first I had no idea what my job would be, but that's why I think it's great when you can get a job that you can kind of make it your own, and that's exactly what we've been able to do here in Terre Haute.
I'm glad you put it that way because I was going to slide it in there, but you literally said it. So when I made the decision to leave the Valley, I literally was going into something that a position that was not in existence, and they hired someone to do what I'm doing. So I'm doing the sponsorship and marketing stuff for a school district, and had this is going to be interesting, and literally building it from the ground up. There was nothing. I've got to come up with a strategy, come up with a pitch, got to come up with some sort of marketing material, all that stuff. Literally create, and I'm still doing that. We've had a great start, but I literally go to high school basketball games of our 3 high schools to get pictures because I need them to build a program. I need them to do this. I want to do some things eventually down the line that I got to have some content for. And it was all about building it from the ground up. And I get, great compliments all the time saying, this is awesome, you're hard work. I'm like, I just want to do a really good job down the road because I've got ideas that hopefully will be even more impressive to you guys coming in the future, which then now I go back to my time in the Valley. And when I start in 2010, none of that's around. So we don't have the ESPN3. We have what's called Valley Live, which is its own independent streaming that web stream productions, now Tupelo Raycom, John Cervisi's group. Yep. They're doing a lot of the work for us. But there's schools having a Luke Martin or Derek Dockett, someone that's shooting video content, wasn't in existence in 2010. And it's weird to think that now in 2018, but just, 5-8 years ago, that's what it was. And so you're going to laugh at this. I took the time, I got approval to get, remember the flip video cameras? They were the size of an iPhone, but you just point and shoot and you plug it in. It had a little USB thing. You plug the whole camera into your computer and you can get the footage off of it. I got 10 of those and sent them to every Valley school. And I said, I need you to shoot some video for me or shoot an interview. And here's a camera to do it. And it's an easy thing. You just plug it in your computer and send it. And then you can FTP it, or if it's small enough, email it. I just needed video content. That's how I sort of started with it. We didn't have all the great ESPN equipment, video cameras, and everything like that. Fast forward a few years, ESPN3 becomes more of a thing. Video content becomes more of a thing. Team intro videos become a thing. All this stuff. Social media. Video content is driving a lot of what schools, not just in the Valley, but across all of, take any division. You'll see anybody doing it. It's a thing. iPhones, make it a little bit more easier nowadays, and flip video cameras, I don't even think are in existence anymore.
No, I have no idea. I haven't seen one probably since you mailed them. So
seriously, but that tells you how time changes quickly.
How fast.
Yeah. And technology too. Absolutely. But with the advent of all this technology and how things had happened, the need to having people to do these kinds of creative things becoming, a thing. And so I'm like, wow, this guy's here doing all this and just turning it around. So I laugh because I look back now and I see you sitting on the baseline or the sideline, and you've always got a video camera in your hand now. But that's how it is. Like that's the work. That's what you do. How are you able to sort of take all of that and put it in perspective and say, okay, I've got all these teams, like at Indiana State, for example, it's not just basketball, it's not just football. You mentioned it's track, softball, baseball, you name it. They all want some time in the sunshine. You want to give it to them, especially now that you're part of the department. That's your role. How do you sort of do the balancing act there and continuously be able to do something unique to each program, but also something that still unifies them all at the same time?
I think the biggest thing also is just having a plan. I think the biggest thing is we try to communicate and say, hey, this is what we're going to do before the semester starts. At least you know how things go. Things get crazy, and you may not necessarily always stick to plan. But I always want to make sure that our coaches know we're going to come your way. Yeah. This is when we're going to come your way. It may not be until a couple of weeks later, but we're eventually going to come to you and we're going to do it. I think the biggest thing, too, is for them to understand, too, I'm not a staff like Purdue, not to throw Purdue under the bus, but Purdue has about eight to nine videographers where they can designate one per team. Sometimes I'll get a coach and they'll come and they'll bring me a Twitter feed and they'll be like, hey, can we do this? And I said, well, we can if we had about 6 more people. So having that realistic expectation, knowing because right now we've hired Logan Dubs, who was a classmate of mine at Ball State. He's my part-time, technically. He's not part-time, but in the ISU HR, he is part-time. But having Logan has helped. But before, when it was just me, you got to understand those day-to-day, the practice updates, those pump-up videos, etc. There's going to be an emphasis on the sports that just have the eyeballs. It's just part of it. That's how those other schools got built. It starts with their basketball or their football, and it filters all throughout. We're still going to get to you. It may not be as much as those other sports, but I promise, at least my guarantee has always been, and I know probably people from the Valley will listen to this, which is fine, but I said, you're going to get more than any other person. You're going to get more than any other volleyball program, than any other women's basketball program, than any other softball program in our league. I guarantee you that. I'm going to do as much as I can, but you're going to get more than anybody else in our league. I can at least guarantee you that standard. That's at least what I always try. And we've met that. And they've been good about it. As you know, I get it. It's
a work in progress.
It's not, it's not a criticism of me when they say they want more. The reason they want more is because it's really good content.
Yes.
And they want that and they love it. And that's why when they ask, hey, could we get this? It's not them saying you don't do enough. They know I'm work like no other with our other sports. They understand my schedule. They get it. They just want some of it too. I think if you're just honest with them and you work with those sports and you say, hey, you come out and you set out a plan and say, this is what we're going to do, they'll be fine and they'll be good about it. And then when you have a major event like when we host the track and field championships later in the spring, we'll pretty much be there every day. That will be the time where they're treated like football, where there's a recap, there's a preview. You look through each day. There's highlights each day, and you treat it like a big deal, as I believe you should, because it's the championship and what it should be. And that's kind of the gist of what we do with all of our sports, or we try to. So it's not, like you said, it's not a perfect system. I think you're always going to have people that wish they had more.
Right.
But you know what? At least that's the issue. They're saying we want more because it's great.
Right.
They're not saying stay away. They're not saying we don't want you around. They're not saying what you're producing is not good. Just as long as you have an understanding of it. And even then, you're probably still going to have some growing pains, and you're probably still going to have some fingers being pointed and saying you want more. But it's honestly all at the end, it's all just because they like what you do. Yeah. And that's that's ultimately what you work and you strive for.
Yeah, I can totally vouch for that, because that's exactly what it was for me when I was at the Valley. It was always a work in progress, and I didn't want to make it just about basketball. I mean, I know basketball was everyone loves Arch Madness, and that's what it was. But man, volleyball in the Missouri Valley Conference, so good. I mean, 4 teams getting into the NCAA tournament, and multiple teams, and baseball, and when you have kids breaking records all the time, and just as many All-Americans as the Big Ten might get, just those kinds of stories I always enjoyed telling. I'm curious to know, because I never worked on campus. I worked in the conference office. There are differences, I'm sure, but I'm curious to know what an average Luke Martin day might be. And I know that there's some caveats in that, because an average day might be a Saturday for you when there's November with the crossover season. You might have football, you may have basketball, a fall baseball. There might be so much going on. But if you were to take an average Monday through Friday day, are you is it crazy? Are you up more hours than normal? Or when are you done editing? What's the regular as you can put it, Luke Martin?
Yeah, no, I would say when I first got out of school, it was crazy. What I've tried to do since then is when it gets to about 5, 6 o'clock at night, when it's the normal end of the work day, it's hard with social media and the way it is. Of course, this excludes game nights. Yeah. But I try my very best to not open Premiere, to not touch anything video related once the day is over. And I've noticed this year, and I really started out this year, I've noticed I've gotten a little bit more sleep. I've been a little bit more even in tune than when I'm working, because I always felt, man, got to get stuff done, do more. And I'd be editing till 10, 11 o'clock at night, and I kind of function like that. But then, it kind of wears you out a little bit. So I tried to find some new ways to try to get more done, maybe during the workday, but also when the workday was done. I mean, trust me, the reason I like what I do is it's not a typical 9-5 job.
Right.
I do try when it is towards the end of that day to shut it down a little bit now, more than normal. But like you said, then you're going to have a week where Saturday we're at Youngstown State playing football. We get back about 2 a.m. in the morning. At 1 o'clock that Sunday afternoon, I'm doing a men's basketball video shoot for 3 hours. That Monday, it's Kirk Mallory Media Day, editing his TV show. That Tuesday, we leave to go to Muncie to play a basketball game Wednesday. We leave that Monday night for a basketball game, come back for that game Tuesday in Muncie against Ball State, come back Wednesday, have football practice, Thursday, fly out to Green Bay.
My goodness. Friday,
play in Green Bay, come back Saturday, you got a football game against Illinois State. So you have weeks like that where you're searching for everything, like, man, where's the time? And this year's even more unique because we have the 40th anniversary of the Larry Bird team this year, and we're doing a lot of video coverage on that. So not only am I recapping a current season going on, I'm recapping a season 40 years ago, getting interviews from each of those guys. So it's a challenge. There are definitely weeks that are much crazier than others. But I think the biggest thing I've learned, with my football prep in the fall during radio broadcasts, I feel my radio broadcasts were much better this year when I actually just decided to go to sleep and rest and not stay up till 2, 3, 4 in the morning doing prep. I used to think, man, do prep. But of course, I'm still prepared. I'm not doing nothing.
Right.
But I actually felt better. I was more rejuvenated and ready to go on a game day when I had more sleep, compared to studying a spot chart, to doing it even more to the wee hours of the morning. So it's been fine tuning. I think that's very important in this field, because your hours are going to be crazy. Don't count them, because if you do, you're going to be depressed. That's just kind of the way it goes. Yeah. You're going to, as great as it was being at the Diamond Head Classic for Christmas, and I am not going to complain about that, because it's nothing to complain, but it is over Christmas. You are still video editing. You still got a quote-unquote job to do, but it's never really a job. It's never felt that way, and that's why I continue to do it, and that's why I'm still doing it.
And that's a key for a lot of people, is that finding something that you love to do and it not feeling like a job. You're doing it because you love the reason that you're doing it. You know why you're doing it. And you appreciate that you're doing it. So you mentioned your preparation for football. And I love the fact, so instead of just tweeting out the highlights and with the ESPN3, you were doing your play-by-play audio with it. And Indians had some pretty good football games. Of course, for folks that don't know, so Luke mentioned Kurt Mallory. I think, so you could probably put this better, but did he engineer the biggest turnaround in college football, like all levels, FCS?
Yes. Well, FCS for sure. I actually don't know in terms of the FBS.
Okay. But the biggest turnaround from, what was the team's record last year?
Oh, I can't remember. I'm joking. It was 0-11.
0-11. And the Sycamores this year were on the cusp, and in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinion, probably should have gotten into the FCS playoffs. Of course, they play in the Missouri Valley Football Conference, which in and year out is rated one of the top two. I'm going to say two, but typically the number one FCS football conference there is where the Sycamores play. And they just barely did not get in. What was the final record this year?
7-4.
7-4.
5 wins in the Valley.
And funny to say this as a Missouri State grad, maybe the loss of Missouri State could be what keeps Indiana State out of the playoffs.
I appreciate those great memories. Thanks for bringing that up. This is an awesome time. I hope that's your last question.
That's when Luke cuts me off now. I bring all this up because, a fantastic turnaround. Coach Mallory's Coach of the Year. Now in the conference, he's gotten several other awards and recognition, as well deserved. But it's rejuvenated the program, has rejuvenated the town of Terre Haute about the football program. Luke was doing play-by-play this year, and if you go back through Indiana State's football Twitter feed, you see the highlights there. You'll see Luke's calls over the video, and they're exciting, they're fun, and I love it. Put them in. I mean, just it's great stuff, and it all led because you mentioned gaining trust, and as I'm going back to just the first part of our discussion here, that's something that you've done really well. You can tell. Like, I've seen you in the locker room in football, which I'm going to bring up something here in a moment, but even just, shoot around with the basketball team. They're shooting half-court shots, and they're like, Luke, you got to take a shot. And they're taking the camera from you, and you're doing it. Like, you literally have built up that camaraderie and that trust with everybody there. And I see the student athletes retweeting and the coaches retweeting. Luke's the man. It's overwhelming. It's perfect. But I've learned that just from talking to you and your energy. So I'm sure it's just sort of taken over the department there. But this fall, Indiana State, you're in the locker room shooting something, and they mentioned you've got to be in the locker room for something too. And they're doing a presentation. And lo and behold, they say, this guy, he's stuck with you. He's been with you since day one. And even though he's not on the field, he's fighting with you. He's there day in and day out in a different capacity. And the camera turns to this guy that Coach Mallory is talking about. And he's talking about the video guy, Luke Martin, and he gives you a Letterman jacket. How awesome is that moment for you? I mean, that sort of epitomizes what this year was for Indiana State football, where it's the biggest turnaround. They got an advocate for them, not only in the booth, social media, digital media, telling their story the right way, and you get rewarded in a very positive light by the head coach to tell his team, tell his student athletes, this guy, even though he's not on the field, he's fighting for you in a different way. What's that moment like for you?
Well, it's by far one of the best moments, actually the best moment I had at Indiana State, because, as you know, and I truly try to function this way, I don't think in the moment of what the work you do and what it does for people. You just keep doing it.
Yeah, you just do it.
You just keep trucking along. And at the time, when you're at this level, sometimes you may think that your work doesn't necessarily get seen a lot, or it doesn't maybe have the biggest impact. And when that happens, I knew those football guys cared about me. I knew the football coach, obviously, and Coach Mallory and his whole staff. We always had a good rapport. But that was a really cool moment. Obviously, for me, just selfishly, it showed they do care.
They notice.
And that they know, and as you know, I joke with he's really become a really good friend of mine. He's one of our best players, Jonas Griffith, who's a linebacker for us. And a year ago, when we were 0-10 at the time, we had to move a football practice due to, I think, a class final. And the football practice was moved from the afternoon to 5 a.m. in the morning. And this was that Wednesday. I would believe it was that Wednesday, middle of the week practice, the hardest practice of the week. And it's at 5 a.m. at Memorial Stadium. And I walk out there with my camera, and Jonas was one of the first ones that were there, and he goes, "Luke, you're here? I mean, like, you're still here? Like, why are you here?" I was like, well, I mean, it's a typical week, like, hey, it's great when you show up and you win your last 5 games. It's not, and you know this as well as anybody because you've been it from a conference standpoint. It's not easy to show up when you've lost every game. And it's not sugarcoating. It's not hiding from the facts and reality. I think that's the biggest misconception is I think sometimes people can paint you as, well, it's easy to be when you're just positive all the time. Look, we face reality too. I treated our football season the same we did a year ago. We weren't very good a year ago. We were 0-11. We had inexperienced guys. We had a lot of guys that were kicked off the team. We weren't very good. But at the same time, not everything has to be tweeted. Not every video story you do has to be, well, we're just horrible.
Right.
That's not the way you do it. And I feel that I do have my own way, and I do have my own way of doing things and try to do it that way. And when Coach Mallory awarded me the letter jacket, it was just, it was just it's not something you ever envision of happening. I was absolutely floored when he said my name. But it's just one of those ways of saying, you know what, you're doing it the right way. And that's not always communicated at times because of how hectic and how crazy. Our schedules can be crazy. They're even more crazy for our football coaches. And just to put it in perspective, that was the week leading into Western Illinois, which was a massive game. And the one thing that's on Coach Mallory's mind is I want to give Luke Martin a letter jacket. So it was crazy. The response from the guys was awesome. And they really are. I mean, it really is a family. You don't, I obviously love my mom and dad, Bill and Michelle Martin. I don't get to see him every day. I get to see him. I didn't get to spend Christmas with him, obviously. Been traveling, been doing a lot of that. I spend more time with Kurt Mallory. I spend more time with Jonas Griffith. I spend more time with Ryan Boyle, all of our guys on the football side, than I do my own family. And that's with all of our sports. And that's why it's a very special connection when you are able to build that trust and build those relationships. It's not that you're replacing your family. They just are your family. Right. Because you are around them so much.
At least you do get to spend time with Ace Hunt as well.
Yes. I mean, how can you not enjoy your time around Ace Hunt? I don't think I've ever seen that guy frown, So just, usually, I got to tell you, I know you saw the gift that I cut up from Hawaii.
I saved it.
That's just. That is prime Ace right there. Hawaiian shirt, great weather, about 78 degrees around Christmas time. Just absolutely perfect.
For those that don't know, of course, we're talking about the main man there at Indiana State, the longtime sports information director, Ace Hunt. He's one of a kind. There's not enough time. I may have to do a separate Ace Hunt episode. I don't know, but he's just one of a kind. And folks around the valley, there are Ace Hunt stories that can be told, and he's just one of the best. He's just one of the best. So, well, look, I don't have much else for you, but I want you, if you can. And one of the reasons why I'm doing this series of podcasts is like just share people's stories. If you can, what's one thing that if you were to sum up just everything you've been through from Ball State, what you've learned in sports communication? Because I hope part of this is, it reaches to, kids that may want to do what you do, or, people that, figure things out. You just have a unique outlook on things, and I've always appreciated it. I just always have felt connected to you because we share similar things and ideas. one thing that you would share with people, just from a, I'm going to be cheesy here, a grand life scale kind of thing of just what's gotten you through day to day, and what's something you would share with people from that line of thinking?
Yeah. There's a lot, as I'm sure you can attest to, that you would point to or say what you bring with you. I think the one thing that I would tell a younger version of myself, if I would go back in time and try to meet Luke Martin when he was a freshman at Ball State, would just be appreciate the moment and understand where you're at, and also understand that you're around a lot of talented people, and everything's not a competition in life. Don't judge yourself based off of someone else's trajectory and someone else's path, because everybody's path is different.
Yep.
There's not one unique path, and that's kind of what's great about our field. But I feel at times it can be so competitive. It can be so job-driven that it's very easy to look at yourself and say, man, I'm not as good as this individual, or I just got to be better than this person. Well, that's not really the way it's got to be. And quite honestly, the older you get, you realize it's not that way. And I wish at times when I was in school, I didn't necessarily have the competitive drive. I think, and that's part of being in sports, because you're around a lot of competitive people.
Right.
So you have a competitive personality. But to realize, you know what, I have a lot of talented classmates. Maybe they know something a little bit more than I do. And you know what, it's okay to admit that. Maybe there's somebody you work with that may not be great in areas of your focus, but there may be a big weakness that you have that they're really strong in. It's okay to go to them and say, hey, can I learn from you? How do you do that so well? I think so much of us, especially in the sports field, can be so competitive, can be so protective that we don't want to show that we have a weakness or that we have weaknesses. We all have weaknesses. There are all things that we don't necessarily maybe do well. And we don't necessarily want to do that because in terms of scouting reports, whatever, when you're preparing for a game, you don't want people to know your weeknesses. You want to try to be able to pounce on them. You want to be able to try to be competitive and come out on top. But I think that's what's driven me and what's allowed me to improve is the fact that, I've been able to stay in the moment. I get asked a lot of times of, hey, man, when are you leaving Indiana State? Sherrard jokes with me from time to time about, man, I can't lose you yet. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. You think I got people knocking at my door every day? I don't. I promise. I can show you my phone. I don't have all these missed calls. These are all these mystery jobs all of a sudden opening. But appreciate the moment, And it was actually Rich Maloney, a baseball coach at Ball State, who's still the baseball coach there. And he told me, he said, Luke, the reason you're going to do well is because when you were here, you treated us like we were the best thing ever. What was important to you was Ball State baseball. When you go to UNCG, make sure that's what's on your mind. It's focusing on UNCG. When I got to Indiana State, making sure my Twitter, whatever I do, whatever I put out, focuses on Indiana State. And that's just living in the moment. Because if you do that, if those people will notice, and it's not about, getting a letter jacket or getting the recognition on Twitter. I don't beg for that. I just follow that path and just say, okay, I'm going to do everything I can. And people can tell, I cannot stand, Derek, how many people bash millennials and say they're idiots and say they're dumb. Maybe they may not be as book smart these days, but they can tell whether someone's genuine and whether someone's fake. And our student athletes can tell if somebody has a genuine interest in them and want them to do well compared to those that are just there to get a better job or just, quite frankly, just care about themselves. And I think that's what living in the moment, understanding you don't know everything, being willing to reach out to people you work with and colleagues around the league. We don't do everything the best at Indiana State. Look around the league, see what everybody else is doing. It's okay to admit that because if you do that, you'd be surprised at how much stronger you can be and how much more you can grow. I just think all those things really go hand in hand at the end of the day. It all goes back to how you build relationships. And that's ultimately where it goes and where it takes you.
I love it. I love it. Is there anything unique up the sleeve of Luke Martin for 2019?
Why would I give out any secrets here? I mean, you just think this is the platform just for me?
Ask.
I appreciate it. I know you got to ask. No, I mean, it's just I'm really excited. You're going to
start like the Indiana State podcast, or are you just going to start a new video, a live thing? I mean, you always seem to figure out something and do it well.
I got to try. I am excited about all the Larry Bird stuff. And I say the Larry Bird stuff.
Yeah, the 40th.
The 1979 team, all of those documentaries and series video features that we're going to start releasing actually the first of the year.
Awesome.
So upcoming very, very fast. That'll be really neat. I'm looking forward to that from a content standpoint. But as you know, it's just not to sound cliche-ish, but just trying to stay in the moment, see where it takes me. And see where it takes to where we go from a coverage standpoint. Because like you mentioned, you keep raising the bar, try to find some new things that you can do. But for right now, I'd love to do a podcast, but honestly, that's probably not going to happen until we hire more of a staff. So
I know exactly where you're at with that one-man band thing. It's tough, but hey, if you can be creative and do it and strategic with your time, all the power. But yeah, I totally get where you're coming from there.
Yeah. So, but other than that, still following the Sycamores. Hopefully, have a really good Valley season for Indiana State basketball. I think it's going to be a really good Valley season for us. But just enjoying the ride as much as you can and see where it takes you, buddy.
Thanks to Luke Martin for taking time to join me on the podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at Luke Martin ISU to keep up with everything he's doing and how he's telling the digital story of Indiana State athletics. And I hope you enjoyed listening, and I would certainly welcome any feedback, questions, or comments about the podcast as well. Feel free to shoot me a tweet at @DDocket, and you're welcome to leave a rating or review on Apple Podcasts and iTunes. Thanks so much for listening to Persons of Interest.